Okay, so we're just about ready to start skinning this character. So just before I do, I'm just going to find the joints group and re-show it so we can see the joints whilst we're skinning. And also we can notice here that there's not really a joint up by the eye, so any skinning that's going to happen to this top part of the eye is all going to be derived from the end of this ribbon spine, which I don't really want, because if I start rotating this lower control, it's going to be rotating the entire eye along with it. So what I actually want is just a joint in this eye up here. So to do this, I'm just going to select both eyes, display the local rotative axes, I'm just going to hide polygons, and with the joint tool I'll just hold down V, press enter, press Y to reactivate the tool, hold down V, and just vert snapping to the centre of the eyes. And that way, as we rotate these controls, which will rotate these joints, we're rotating around the eye, so the whole eyelid is going to stay, on the outside of the eye. It's not going to clip with it. Okay, so I'll rename these JTBN underscore left I01, and I'll copy the name to the other side and rename it right. Okay, so what I'm going to do here as well is increase the radius to about 3, and this doesn't really have any effect on skinning, but it just tells me as I'm skinning, I'm reminding myself that these joints are large for a reason, because I want them to have a large influence over this area. So it doesn't affect the actual skinning, but it just reminds me that I should be skinning this entire area to these large joints. Okay, so selecting these two, I'm going to put them in their BN joints group, and then I'm also going to parent constraint these. So constraint parent, I'll just hit G to repeat the last command. Okay, so I can bring back polygons and just hide the local rotative axes because I don't need to see it anymore. Okay, so there's one thing I want to mention again, is the signing off of different phases. So what I mean by signing off is making sure this character model is 100% pretty much finished. So I'm happy with how the edge loops are, I'm happy with how they're going to work with skinning. Do a default skinning and see if there's any problems. So like if you stretch this really far backwards, is there enough edge loops down here? If you want to really stretch this. So we're just going to spend a little time looking at this model and just thinking about how it's going to work. So one thing I want to change, if I just collapse this group here, is, and it's always good to just duplicate, and you can keep a copy, so I can just hide that. So we're going to hide the copy. So if anything goes wrong, we've always got that copy that we can just re-show and go back to it. Okay, so with this selected, I'm just going to show, isolate, and view selected. Now, as I mentioned before, I've used this character before for an animation, and the rig for that, the arms were squashy and stretchy, but there was no ribbon spines in them. They were just the normal, free joints. They didn't even have a double elbow, which made it impossible to have the twist on this. So when we start rotating actually I'll just bring it back. What we set up earlier with the full arm twist, as we start rotating this, you can see all these joints are twisting round, and as we skin that's going to twist all these edge loops on the arm. But the downside of that, if I just hide the just show the model again, we can see that actually there's quite large areas in between the edge loops. So going back again, we can see that in this edge loop here, these sets of faces here, there's actually 2 joints. So it's a bit awkward because there's not enough edge loops to work with the amount of joints we've made for the ribbon spine. And we don't want to remove the joints because we want that many joints to allow that really nice sine wave, that really nice twist of the arm. So just like here, this joint here will probably be fully weighted to this edge loop here, and then this joint here will be weighted to that edge loop, but this joint here, it's sharing this edge loop with another joint, so we're not going to get a decent twist in this area. And it's not going to matter for if you're only using the normal arm joint where it's just got the arm, two elbows, the forearm and the wrist, because you're not going to get a lot of twist there, so that's where you don't really need to have so many edge loops. This mesh will probably work, but for the purpose of this we want to add quite a few edge loops in here, so when we get these really stretchy limbs, it's not going to collapse, it's not going to crumple up. But again, if you remember from the UV texture editor, we already have some UV set up, it's already been laid out. I don't want to retexture this, so I want to find a way, and also I want it to be symmetrical still. So ideally, if we want to set up the UVs, I'd probably delete half this character, start adding edge loops, and then remirror it over, and then I'd set up the UVs. But because the UVs are already there, I don't want to waste time, redoing them. So, and again with the antennas here, there's not a whole lot of edge loops around here. There's a decent amount if this was as far as the eyes will go, but because squashing and stretching, and we've got those wavy bits in there, I want to add a bit more. Okay, so to do this, what I'm actually going to do, so I'll go in the front view, I'm going to select the entire arm, so probably deselect, so just these large faces. I'll deselect these edge loops around the middle, because there's quite a few in there, so I don't want to. And if you ever get any problems like this where it's quite hard to select things, another way we can do this is I could just select the edge loops that I want. So I'm just double clicking and holding shift to add to the selection. Making sure I don't select any other edge loops. Okay, so I'm selecting all the edge loops. I'm not selecting the last one that's closest to this elbow. I'm just going to go to polygons, selection, so select convert selection, and to faces, and you can see it's going to select the faces on either side. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is hold down W to get the move tool, left click, go to reflection and switch reflection on, and we can double click that in the options there if we want. It should be down at the bottom. There's a reflection, because it's symmetrical I can do it across the world, across the X, and I'm doing this just to see which faces I need to be selecting, so make sure I'm in faces mode. I can see here it's going to mirror across the display, so now I can just see. So I'm selecting the same faces on both sides. Okay, and I'm just switch reflection off again. So I'm just rotating round, checking what same loops selected. Okay, I'm quite happy with that. So what I'm going to do now is just go to mesh, and I'll go to smooth. Go to the options. I'll just reset the settings, and we could just leave it as the normal settings. We're just going to apply smooth to this, because we've got the faces selected. It's just going to apply it to the selected faces, so I'll hit apply, and I'd still rather have another edge loop in between as well, so I'll hit apply again. Okay, so we've increased the resolution, which is good, but you can see down here we now have these faces, which we call n-gons, because they've got more than 4 sides. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 sides. If we were to smooth this, you can see we're going to get these really nasty, artifacts around here. It's not going to smooth well if we do any smooth to it later on, and it's also not going to skin well. But we were only interested in the edge loops, around the tube of this arm, as that's what's going to be the twisting. So what we can actually do is just holding shift and double clicking with the selection tool. I'm just going to go around select all these edge loops, miss the ones that do match with the rest of the body topology, and just make sure you don't select any edges anywhere else. And I'm just going to go around and select all these edges. So I'm just going to pause the video and select all the edges on both sides. Okay, so just going to go ahead and selected all of those extra edge loops that we don't want, and I'm just going to check that there's no other edges that we don't want to delete selected. So just making sure we've got the correct one selected. Okay, so with these selected, we don't want to just hit delete, because that's going to leave these vertices behind. So what we actually want to do is just go to edit mesh and go to delete edge / vertex. Just let that run for a minute. I'm just going to go through and delete every edge and every vertex. So now we can see, if we go to vertex, there's no vertices along here, and we've just got those edge loops left. And because we smooth them at the same time, and this is, you know, perfectly mirrored geometry, we know that it's going to smooth the mesh evenly on each side. So to double check that, with the reflection on for the move tool or the select tool, I can go ahead and just click on these vertices, and I can see on the opposite side it's selecting the corresponding vertex. So that's telling me that, you know, these are in the same area mirrored over. So that's worked. So this is just a way that we can, you know, this character has been used before and I'm using him for a different purpose, and I don't want to re-UV again, so it's a way of saving time that we can change the model without needing to delete and remirror. Okay, so this area is looking quite nice, I quite like that. But towards these armpits, it goes from quite smooth, quite a lot of edge loops, to, again, quite a big blocky gap. So another thing I'm going to do here is go to edit mesh, insert edge loop tool. And actually before I do that, I'm going to select the geometry and just delete the history. So we're getting rid of that smooth and poly delete. Okay, so I'll go back to the insert edge loop tool, and I'm just going to put a loop in the middle, and that's looking alright, and a loop on the other side. Now we can see that selecting this loop, so I'll undo that first, and I'll take reflection off so we're not getting distracted by that. So insert edge loop tool, and I'll just click one in over here and click another over here. Now just clicking them in manually means that if we select this vertex and go back to the reflection, we can see it's picking it up, but the tolerance is set quite high. So if I reset this to the defaults, we can see it's not finding it on the other side. So it is on these poly smooths that we did earlier, so we know that's mirrored across perfectly, but this extra edge loop that we've just created, it's not mirroring it across perfectly because we've just clicked an edge loop on either side, so we don't know that they're going to be perfectly mirrored across. So what I can do here is actually just go into object mode, select the snail, and we have these two poly split rings in the inputs, which is the history. And if we click on these, it's bringing up the options of that edge loop tool. So we can see the weight. What the weight means is basically it's a 0 and 1 value between 0 being the edge loop on the left and 1 being the edge loop on the right. So if I set this to 0.5, that means it's going to be perfectly in the middle. So you can see, if I actually middle mouse click and drag this, you can see it actually updating and moving from left to right. So I'm going to set this to 0.5, and what that means is if I get the poly split ring 2, which is the edge loop on the opposite side, I can also put 0.5 in here, and now this means that they're perfectly mirrored across. So that's another way that you can still use some of the tools and get them to mirror across perfectly. So that's looking quite good, I'm quite happy with that. We've got this extra geometry in here just for the twist. Okay, so what we'll need to do is do the same up here. So I'm going to go into the front view, select these two here. I'll just take mirror off, reflection off. Edit mesh or mesh smooth. I'll just apply it twice. And we'll go ahead and reselect each one of these. And I'm just going to pause the video here and do the same, just reselecting all these edge loops. Okay, so I'm just going around, select all these edge loops. And again, just double checking we haven't got anything we don't want to delete. And then I'm just going to go edit, delete edge / vertex again. And you'll notice it's done a good job. It's got rid of what we wanted. But there's a few areas. There's an edge loop here we've got to select. There's a couple here. So we just want to go through and just make sure we get each one of these correctly. Do the same again, and I've added this to my shelf here, so I'm just going to click the shelf icon. Okay, it's looking good around the top, but down here we have a few weird things going on. So what we want to do actually here is, I'm just going to show view selected. I'm just going to move this up, and that duplicate that we made earlier, we made for a reason, because now I can just select these two. Show isolate selected, view selected. I'm just going to move it back down, and then I'm going to check the topology on these. So just double checking. So actually we can see here we did have these weird faces which were 5-sided with these edge loops along here. So it might look like we've got an error, but actually we have got the original result. So it looks like we've had an edge loop there that we've deleted by accident. But we can see actually that was part of the original mesh. This is why you need to keep double checking it as well, because there's going to be quite a lot of deformation in this area, because this is where the antenna attaches, you know, to the head. So this is an area that's going to squash and stretch and bend quite a bit. So having this 5-sided shape here might, you know, not let us get the correct shapes as we try to deform it. So I'm going to take these two edge loops and delete them as well. And we can see that's a lot cleaner actually. Same over here. Goes right around to the other side. So actually around here we don't want to delete this edge loop, because we can see it's running round the back, and actually make sure we get all of these. Is the yep, so delete edge / vertex, making sure we get all of them. So yeah, we'll get rid of this edge loop as well. Okay, so what we could do now in here actually is we could turn reflection on if we wanted, and start moving some of these about. So actually before I do that, I'm going to add in 2 more edge loops here, and then split ring, which is the edge loop, I'm going to set back to 0.5 for both of these. So we're getting that back in there. Okay, that's looking good. So what we could actually do down here is, if we select the Sculpt Geometry tool, so we can go to Edit Geometry, and actually it's in mesh, and sculpt geometry tool, go to the option box, and down at the bottom we do have, under stroke, we do have a reflection. We can reflect across X. The only problem with this is there is a tendency to, if these two brushes overlap, so with relax, we're sort of relaxing where that information's been lost, so that edge loop's been deleted, so we want to sort of relax these to fill in the gaps so it's more evenly spaced. So that's the relax tool. But you always want to be careful with this tool because it has a tendency to, when you're mirroring it across, it doesn't always mirror it perfectly. So I've just relaxed that slightly, and I'm just going to go through, and with reflection on you can see actually we're not mirroring it across now. So I'll just make sure I'm on the grid. So reflection on. Yep, you can see here these vertexes. These ones down here which I haven't changed, they're mirroring across fine. But up here we use that smooth tool, that sculpt geometry tool, and actually it's not mirrored it across perfectly. So I'm just going to undo that. Make sure I don't undo these edge loops up here. Okay, and because it's such a small area, I'm actually just going to manually move these into place. So there's not a whole lot that we need to do. And because we've got reflection on, you can see here I can't move it off the grid, can't move it off that X axis, can't move it in X. So I'm just going to move that into place. And then just check from different angles. So again, if the UVs weren't made for this, what I probably would have done is done it to one side, deleted the other side. So delete half the mesh, just apply all these edits to the other side and then mirror it across. But because we've got the UVs and textures set up, I don't want to spend the extra time redoing those textures. So I'm just going to spend a little bit of time here. Okay. So that's looking good. We can take the wireframe off the shaded, so we can just see the shaded mode, not getting distracted by the wireframe. If there are any vertices sticking out, we'll be able to see them, but that's looking quite good. Quite happy with that. So we've added the extra resolution in there, and the ribbon spine ends here, so we don't really need to add any more edge loops to the top of the eye. So that way we've added all the edge loops we need to the arms and the antennas, and we've still kept the mesh mirrored with no need to mirror the geometry over and screw up the UVs or redo the UVs. So now I can just go to delete history. I'll reset transforms of this duplicate, and with this duplicate, what I'm going to do is just hit Shift P to unparent, put that in the temp group, so we've always got it as a copy if we need to. And I'm going to go to Windows UV Texture Editor, and just double checking here that as we add edge loops, we split and do different things, it's going to try and attempt to keep it quite consistent in here. So you can see these edge loops on the arm, they haven't flipped over here, they haven't tried to create new UVs, it's just put the loops smoothly in the middle, which is good. Okay, so last thing I'm going to just double check is these elbows here. So again, with these elbows, what I'm going to do is just add 2 edge loops either side of the elbow, and the same over here, because this is quite a large gap again, so I'm just going to add 2 in there, and then again with the split ring put 0.5 to make sure it's been mirrored across perfectly. Point five. Okay, and then we'll just go to delete history, freeze transformations, and there we go. So we've increased the resolution of those arms without affecting, you know, any of the UVs, so it's going to save us a lot of time. And now we've got that extra resolution, to work with the twist. So now we'll be able to keep deforming this quite a lot. So this is going to save a lot of time. If we'd have gone through the skinning and then realised as we twist this arm, you know, it's not keeping the volume, we'd have to go back, we'd have to edit this model, you know, like we've just done, and then redo all the skinning again. So just in hindsight, thinking about things, thinking about how these arms are going to deform, we know that they're going to twist a lot, so we know we want extra edge loops in there to work with the extra ribbon joints. So that's the way that we want to sign off on this model. We want to check the topology, we want to check how it's going to work, think about how it's going to move, so we've got a better insight of what we want to do with this model, how we want to have all these edge loops to work with the skinning. Okay, so now this mesh is done, quite happy with it. So I'm just going to show everything, and we're going to move on to the skinning now.